When we speak of consciousness, we're often speaking of a mystery, something deeply intimate, and yet endlessly elusive. Here we are, each of us with our own experience, looking out at the world and wondering, what is all this really? And more curiously, what am I really? We usually think of consciousness as something we have like it's a kind of tool, or a property of the brain, much like a car's engine. But let's step back. Consciousness is not just another piece of equipment. It's the very stage on which all of life unfolds. It's the movie screen on which every scene, every emotion, every sensation plays out. Now, when we look at it this way, consciousness is not just a byproduct of our brain or an isolated experience in our heads. It's far more than that. It's a process, a flow, a field. It's not yours or mine, it's the very fabric of experience itself. The same consciousness flows through you, through me, through the whole world, through every living being. So let's discard this notion that consciousness is separate from the world we observe. Imagine the waves in the ocean. They rise, peak, and then dissolve back into the water. But at no point is a wave ever separate from the ocean. Our consciousness is much like that, each of us, a wave in the vast ocean of awareness. We arise as individuals, experience life for a time, and eventually we merge back into that same boundless field. But at no point were we ever truly separate from it. So what does this mean for us in practical terms? It means we are not strangers in a foreign world. We are the world, experiencing itself, perceiving itself. Every bit of joy, sorrow, fear, and wonder that we feel is not just happening to us, it's happening as part of us within this vast interconnected network of awareness. And yet we often believe in the illusion of separateness. We say, I am here, and you are there, but consciousness is like a river. It doesn't recognize these artificial divisions. The whole universe is one continuous flow, one vast field of experience. And once we see this, the game of life changes completely. You see, what happens to you doesn't just happen to someone else, it happens to all of us. Your experience is the world's experience, too. This brings us to a simple truth: consciousness is not a thing. It is not confined, controlled, or limited to one person or one place. It is the very foundation of existence itself. It is open, expansive, boundless. When we recognize this, we begin to understand that there's no need to grasp or cling to a particular sense of self that's just one of the many waves in the ocean. And with this understanding, we feel a sense of unity, a profound connection, and ultimately peace. The burdens of life lighten, the fears soften, and we start to see life not as a struggle, but as a dance. So I invite you to let go, to release the need to define yourself, to hold on to the boundaries of me and mine. Let yourself flow. Feel yourself as part of this great, boundless consciousness that moves through everything, that is everything. Embrace the mystery and allow yourself to rest in it, to see the world and yourself as one and the same. Consciousness isn't something to be understood as much as it's something to be experienced. So let's be here, fully present, fully aware, and fully alive, not as separate beings, but as expressions of this one, infinite, universal awareness. Consciousness, when viewed deeply, is not just an individual's experience. It is far more expansive than our personal awareness, something beyond the boundaries of me and mine. We often operate under the idea that consciousness is a byproduct of our brain or nervous system, something produced by our physical bodies. Yet what if consciousness isn't just an isolated experience in individual minds? Imagine it as a fundamental fabric that we all share, a vast, boundless ocean in which every individual mind is merely a wave. In this view, our personal experiences are just localized expressions of something infinitely larger. When we talk about consciousness as universal, we're suggesting that it is a unified field that transcends individual organisms. Each of us experiences life from a unique perspective, yet that perspective is not the entirety of consciousness. It's a small window into it. Just as a single wave arises from the ocean, peaks, and eventually returns to it, so too do individual experiences arise within this universal awareness. At no point does a wave cease to be the ocean. It is simply a temporary form that appears, moves, and then dissolves. Similarly, consciousness isn't something that can be reduced to separate, isolated beings. It's the same fundamental reality that flows through every life form, every being, every experience. To consider consciousness as universal is to challenge the deeply ingrained belief that each of us is an isolated self cut off from the rest of the world. This belief in separation fuels the illusion that we are somehow alone in our experiences, that we are each fundamentally distinct and unrelated. However, consciousness, in its universal sense, knows no boundaries. It transcends nationality, language, and even species. It flows continuously, experiencing life through many forms and many perspectives without ever being confined by them. There is no single owner of consciousness, rather. It's as if there is only one consciousness experiencing life through countless forms, each of which provides a unique viewpoint. Think of consciousness as a river that flows through the landscape of existence. Each of us, every living being, is like a drop in that river. While we might experience ourselves as separate drops moving along our paths, we are part of the same continuous flow. The experiences, thoughts, and feelings that arise within us are all aspects of this universal consciousness manifesting itself in various ways. It's a process that doesn't belong to us individually, but is rather something we participate in. Consciousness itself is always present, like a boundless sky in which the clouds of individual experiences drift, appear and disappear. The sky is not diminished or limited by any particular cloud, and no single cloud can claim ownership of the sky. This perspective invites us to see consciousness not as something locked inside our heads, limited to the individual, but as a shared, collective experience. Just as different instruments in an orchestra play unique notes yet contribute to the same symphony, so too do our individual perspectives enrich and shape the larger field of consciousness. When we look at it this way, it becomes clear that we are not merely separate observers of the universe, we are expressions of the universe observing itself. Every experience, every moment of awareness is a ripple on the surface of this vast, boundless sea. And while these ripples have their own shapes and paths, they all belong to the same endless ocean. In viewing consciousness as universal, we also begin to understand that it is timeless. Consciousness itself does not age or deteriorate, only the forms it takes on do. Just as the ocean remains, even as each wave rises and falls, consciousness remains constant, even as individuals are born, live, and eventually pass away. The essence of consciousness, pure awareness, is untouched by the passing of time. It does not come and go, but is always here, manifesting itself in an infinite variety of forms. When we recognize this timeless aspect of consciousness, we see that life is not a series of separate, disconnected events, but rather a continuous unfolding of one unified awareness. In seeing consciousness as universal, we might also recognize that our own experiences are not isolated. They are part of a vast, interconnected web. When we feel joy, sorrow, love, or fear, we are participating in something far greater than ourselves. Our individual joys and sorrows are ripples in the universal field of awareness, each adding texture and depth to the experience of life as a whole. In this way, consciousness becomes a shared experience, a communal tapestry in which each thread is woven together with every other. We are not simply individuals floating in a vast, indifferent universe. We are the universe experiencing itself moment by moment. The beauty of seeing consciousness as universal is that it allows us to transcend the limitations of our individual selves. It opens the door to a profound sense of unity and connectedness. Rather than feeling isolated and separate, we come to see ourselves as integral parts of a larger whole. Just as each cell in the body contributes to the life of the entire organism, so too do our individual lives contribute to the experience of universal consciousness. This perspective brings with it a deep sense of peace and belonging, a recognition that we are never truly alone, for the same consciousness that flows through us flows through everything and everyone around us. In this way, consciousness is universal, boundless, and interconnected. It is the common thread that links all of existence, the underlying reality that binds us together. The belief that we are separate, individual entities moving through a world distinct from ourselves, is one of the most powerful illusions we experience. It shapes our lives, influencing how we view others, how we interpret our place in the world, and even how we understand ourselves. From the moment we become aware of the world, we are taught to identify with a self that feels separate from everything around it. We say, I am here, and you are there, or this is my mind, my body, my life, which creates a division between me and not me, building up walls that isolate us from the greater whole. This illusion of separateness is born from our senses and reinforced by language. We see ourselves as distinct physical bodies, each confined to its own perspective, and this reinforces a feeling of isolation. When we look at others, we see different faces, different bodies, and we hear different voices, each seemingly independent from our own. Language, too, plays a role by constructing reality in terms of I and your, mine and yours. These concepts give shape to an individual identity, one that stands apart from the rest of existence. And yet, when we look deeper, we begin to question if this separation is as concrete as it appears. Think of it this way: when you walk outside and feel the wind against your skin, is the wind really separate from you? The sensation of wind exists only because there is a body to feel it. Likewise, when you see a landscape, the landscape only becomes part of your experience through the act of seeing. The boundary between you and the world becomes blurred. In a very real sense, the world is not simply something out there. It is part of your experience, and that experience is deeply interconnected. Just as the sea and the shore meet and merge, so does your awareness blend with the world around you. Another way to look at the illusion of separateness is through the lens of consciousness. Each of us experiences reality in a uniquely personal way, but that experience is not happening in isolation. Rather, it is part of a larger field of awareness. Imagine consciousness as a vast ocean, with each individual as a wave rising on its surface. Each wave has its own shape and motion, its own unique identity for a time. However, that wave is never truly separate from the ocean. It is simply a temporary expression of the ocean. In the same way, each of us is an expression of consciousness, an experience within a larger, interconnected field of awareness. We may seem separate on the surface, but at a deeper level we are intimately connected. The illusion of separateness also influences how we view others. When we see ourselves as isolated entities, it becomes easy to see others as different, foreign, or even threatening. We draw lines of division, creating distinctions based on race, nationality, religion, or status. But when we begin to see beyond this illusion, we recognize that each of us is a unique expression of the same life force. The differences that appear on the surface are not walls, they are variations within a single interconnected whole. The same consciousness that moves through you is moving through everyone else, each life unfolding within a shared experience. By seeing this, we can cultivate a sense of empathy and compassion, understanding that what happens to another person is not separate from what happens to us. This interconnectedness extends beyond humans to all of nature. The trees, rivers, animals, and even the earth itself are part of the same web of life. We are not separate from nature, we are expressions of it. Our bodies are made from the same elements, our lives sustained by the air, water, and food provided by the earth. The illusion of separateness allows us to exploit and damage the natural world, thinking it is something apart from ourselves. But when we see that we are a part of nature, that our well-being is intertwined with the well-being of the planet, our relationship to the earth transforms. We move from a mindset of exploitation to one of stewardship and care. The illusion of separateness also shapes how we view our own minds. We often think of our thoughts and feelings as belonging exclusively to us, as if they arise in a vacuum. But in reality, our thoughts are influenced by countless factors: our culture, family, environment, and interactions with others. Our beliefs, fears, and desires are not created in isolation, but are shaped by the world around us. Recognizing this interdependence can free us from the idea that we are isolated islands of consciousness helping us see that our inner lives are part of a larger collective experience. Once we begin to dissolve the illusion of separateness, a profound shift occurs. We no longer see ourselves as isolated individuals struggling to survive in a hostile world. Instead, we realize that we are participants in a grand, interconnected dance of life. Every action, every thought, and every emotion becomes part of a larger whole, contributing to the web of existence. Our sense of self expands, moving from a narrow focus on me and mine to a broader awareness that includes others in the world around us. In the end, seeing through the illusion of separateness allows us to experience a deeper sense of unity, peace, and connection. We begin to understand that the boundaries we once held so tightly are not real. They are simply ideas created by the mind. By letting go of these ideas, we open ourselves to a richer, more expansive experience of life, one that is rooted in the recognition that at the deepest level, we are all interconnected. Embracing unity and letting go of the self is an invitation to move beyond the boundaries of individual identity and step into a broader, more expansive experience of life. Our minds often construct the idea of a self as a central reference point, an I, that stands separate from everything else. This sense of self becomes the anchor for our thoughts, emotions, and desires. However, this concept of self is largely a mental construct shaped by memories, experiences, social roles, and personal stories. Letting go of this constructed self doesn't mean we lose who we are. Rather, it means we release the limits of identification and experience a deeper, more connected existence. Embracing unity is about recognizing that our true nature is not confined to this isolated sense of self, but is part of an interconnected whole that includes everyone and everything. Consider the simple act of breathing. Each time we inhale, we draw in oxygen that has traveled across the planet, perhaps from distant forests, mountains, or oceans. When we exhale, we release carbon dioxide, which is then absorbed by plants, completing a cycle of life that connects all living beings. Our breath is not ours alone. It is part of a shared process that sustains life everywhere. Similarly, our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are not isolated events. They are part of a vast network of human consciousness, constantly influencing and being influenced by one another. This interconnectedness exists whether or not we recognize it, and when we embrace it, we begin to experience a profound sense of unity that transcends the limited self. Letting go of the self doesn't mean erasing our individual identities. It means loosening our grip on the rigid boundaries we create between self and other. This can bring a sense of freedom, as we realize that our identity is not confined to a name, a body, or a history. Instead, it is part of a larger, flowing experience of life. We are like waves in the ocean. Each wave has its own form, its own path, but it is never separate from the ocean. It is the ocean, just as each of us is life itself, expressed in a unique way. The wave that tries to exist independently will eventually find itself absorbed back into the ocean, just as our individual lives are expressions of a greater unity that we return to. Embracing this unity transforms the way we relate to others. When we see ourselves as separate, we often approach others with judgment, comparison, or fear. We create barriers based on appearance, beliefs, or background, forgetting that these are just surface distinctions. When we see beyond these distinctions, we recognize that the essence within each person is the same as the essence within ourselves. This perspective naturally fosters empathy, compassion, and kindness. We start to feel that when we help another, we are really helping ourselves, because we are part of a shared existence. Kindness, then, is no longer something we give out of obligation. It becomes a natural expression of our interconnectedness. In practical terms, letting go of the self can involve stepping out of our own stories and seeing situations from a broader perspective. We often become attached to our personal narratives, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, what we deserve, and what we have experienced. These narratives shape our reality, but they are ultimately limiting. When we hold tightly to these stories, we miss the fluid, ever-changing nature of life. By letting go of the self, we loosen our attachment to these narratives and begin to see life as it really is: open, dynamic, and boundless. We become less focused on defending our identity and more open to the richness of each moment. In this space of openness, we realize that life is not about struggling to maintain a fixed identity, but about flowing with the experience of existence itself. This shift in perspective can bring a deep sense of peace. When we no longer see ourselves as separate from life, the fear and anxiety that come with self-protection begin to dissolve. Instead, we start to experience life with a sense of trust and surrender, knowing that we are part of a greater whole that is always unfolding. There is less need to control or resist. We learn to dance with the flow of life rather than fight against it. Embracing unity also connects us to the natural world in a powerful way. We begin to feel that nature is not something outside of us, but part of our very being. The trees, rivers, mountains, and stars are no longer distant objects. They are extensions of the same life force that moves through us. This realization brings a sense of reverence for the earth, a respect for all forms of life. We see that just as we are not separate from other people, we are also not separate from nature. The boundary between ourselves and the natural world fades, and we feel a sense of belonging, as though we are finally home. Ultimately, letting go of the self and embracing unity invites us to live with an open heart. Instead of being closed off, guarded, or fearful, we can approach life with a spirit of openness and love. We begin to see that life is not something that happens to us, but something we are a part of, something we participate in fully. Every experience, every interaction, every moment becomes an opportunity to express this deeper connection. In unity, we find freedom from the burdens of self-centered thoughts, and instead we live with a sense of wholeness and harmony. Life becomes less about me and more about we, and this shift brings a richness to life that the isolated self could never attain. In letting go, we find that we are not losing anything essential. Rather, we are expanding into a fuller, more vibrant existence, one that is rooted in connection, peace, and the timeless essence of unity.